upper chambers are called atria and the lower chambers are called ventricles. So here, right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. The heart also has 4 valves. These are like little doors which only open one way. This ensures that the blood is flowing in the right direction and doesn't flow backwards. Tricuspid and pulmonary valve are on the right. The mitral and aortic valves are on the left. It's important to remember that veins carry blood to the heart and arteries carry blood away from the heart. The superior and inferior vena cava are large veins that deliver deoxygenated blood into the heart. The superior vena cava delivers blood into the heart from the superior part of the body. This includes the head, neck, arms, and chest. The inferior vena cava delivers blood into the heart from inferior parts of the body. This includes organs in the abdomen, legs, feet, etc. The pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. The aorta is the main artery that carries oxygenated blood away from the heart to the rest of the body. The pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs. Now let's go through the full process. Deoxygenated blood from the body flows into the right atrium via the superior and inferior vena cava. The right atrium contracts and the blood flows through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. The ventricle contracts and the blood flows up through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. This is then taken out of the heart into the lungs. At the same time, the oxygenated blood from the lungs enters the heart through the left atrium via the pulmonary veins. The left atrium contracts and blood then flows through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. The left ventricle contracts and oxygenated blood flows up through the aortic valve into the aorta. This blood is then sent around the body via arteries. Remember, in one heartbeat, blood enters and exits the heart from both sides.
The heart is a muscular organ about the size of a fist. It is located just behind and slightly left of the breastbone named sternum. The human heart pumps blood throughout the body via circulatory system, supplying oxygen and nutrients to the tissue and removing carbon dioxide and other wastes. The heart consists of 4 chambers. 2 chambers are located in the upper portion of the heart called atria, which consist of right and left atrium, while the 2 chambers are located in the lower portion of the heart called ventricles, which consist of right and left ventricle. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the veins and pumps it to the right ventricle. The right ventricle receives that blood from the right atrium and pumps it to the lungs, where it is loaded with oxygen. As the blood is now oxygenated, the left atrium receives that oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumps it to the left ventricle. The left ventricle pumps oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. Each chamber of the heart is separated by valves that only permit blood to flow in one direction. The tricuspid valve is located between the right atrium and right ventricle, and it opens due to a buildup of pressure in the right atrium. The bicuspid valve is located between the left atrium and left ventricle, and likewise it opens due to a buildup of pressure in the left atrium. The semilunar valves stop the backflow of blood into the heart. There is a semilunar valve where the aorta leaves the left ventricle, and another valve where the pulmonary artery leaves the right ventricle. The right and left hand side of the heart is separated by muscular wall called septum. The septum prevents the mixing of oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. The heart pumps blood through the network of arteries and veins called blood vessels. The vessels that bring blood to the heart are called veins, while the vessels that carry blood away from the heart to other regions of the body are called arteries. There are 4 main blood vessels that take blood into and out of the heart. Number 1. Aorta. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. It carries oxygenated blood away from the left ventricle to the body. Number 2. Vena cava. The vena cava is the largest vein in the body. It carries deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart. Number 3. Pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery carries deoxygenated blood away from the right ventricle to the lungs. Number 4. Pulmonary vein. The pulmonary vein returns oxygenated blood from the lungs to the heart. Thank you.
Human urinary system. The kidneys are a pair of bean-shaped organs that are part of the urinary system. The kidneys are dark red, slightly flattened, bean-shaped organs, each about 10 centimeters long, 5 centimeters wide, and 2 to 3 centimeters thick, with an average weight of 120 to 170 grams. The other components of this system are the ureters, urinary bladder, and the urethra. One of the main jobs of the kidney is to filter the waste out of the blood. The urinary system regulates the quantity and composition of fluids by removing metabolic wastes from our body. The system helps in retaining proper amounts of water, salts, and nutrients in the body. The kidneys are placed against the back wall of the abdominal cavity, just below the diaphragm, one on either side of the vertebral column. Their position is slightly asymmetrical. The left kidney is placed a little higher than the right. The outer surface of a kidney is convex, and the inner surface is concave. The inner surface has a deep notch. Here you can see the ureter, renal artery, and renal vein entering the kidney through this notch. A fibrous capsule surrounds the kidney. Inside the kidney, there are 2 zones, the cortex and the medulla. The cortex is a reddish-brown layer of tissue below the capsule, whereas medulla is a form of pale conical-shaped striations. The main function of the kidneys is to remove waste products and excess water from the blood. The kidney does it with the help of tiny filters present in it. These filters are called nephrons. The cortex and medulla together comprise millions of such nephrons, all packed together. The nephron is the structural and functional unit of a kidney. Each nephron consists of a renal corpuscle and a renal tubule. A renal corpuscle is composed of 2 structures: a tangled cluster of blood capillaries called glomerulus and a thin-walled sac-like structure called the Bowman's capsule, which surrounds the glomerulus. The glomerulus is actually a miniature filtering or sieving device which consists of a tightly coiled network of capillaries. Waste is filtered from the blood and collected as urine. Healthy kidneys act like a strong filter to make sure the right amount of wastes and fluids are removed from our body. As each kidney makes urine, the urine slides down through a long tube called ureter. Ureters from both the kidneys open into a storage sac known as urinary bladder. Here, urine is stored until the bladder is emptied by urinating. The bladder is connected to another tube-like structure called the urethra for the removal of urine out of the body. Every day, our kidneys process around 200 liters of blood, and around 1 to 2 liters of waste is removed as urine.
The cardiovascular system, also called the circulatory system, is the transportation system of the body. The major structures that make this possible are the heart, blood vessels, and blood. Simply put, the heart pumps the blood in order to move nutrients through the blood vessels to nourish and remove the metabolic waste from the body. The purpose of this video is to present a basic understanding of the cardiovascular system. A more in-depth study of the system will be presented in other CTE videos where we will look into each specific part and function of this system. The heart has two major circuits within the circulatory pathway which work together in a closed circulatory system. These two pathways are the pulmonary pathway and the systemic pathway. In the human organism, the right side of the heart pushes the blood through the pulmonary circuit so that it can be oxygenated in the lungs. The left side of the heart pumps oxygenated blood to the entire body. The blood is then returned to the heart via the systemic pathway, where the cycle begins again through the pulmonary pathway. It can be said that the heart is actually two pumps divided by a septum or wall. As mentioned in the muscular system video, the heart is an involuntary muscle that works somewhat independently from the nervous system. This will be explained in more detail later, but for now, let's take a look at what makes up the heart. The heart is a muscular organ with 4 hollow chambers. It consists of 2 atria, which are the upper chambers, and 2 ventricles, which are the lower chambers. The left and right sides of the heart are divided by the septum. The heart is also made up of 3 layers of tissues. The innermost layer is the endocardium, which is the thin, smooth membrane that lines the inside of the chambers of the heart and forms the surface of the valves, of which there are 4. Next is the myocardium, which is the middle layer. It's the muscular wall of the heart, or the heart muscle. And third, the pericardium. This is a tough, double-layered, fibrous sac which covers the heart. The word vessel has many meanings, but in anatomy and physiology, blood vessels are meant for carrying blood throughout the body. The blood vessels are similar to a two-way highway system. One lane, or direction, is known as the arteries, and the other is called the veins. Starting in the heart, the blood flows to the body through arterial blood vessels. The largest of these arteries is known as the aorta. These arteries provide the pathway for blood to travel to the body from the heart. Arteries are then further divided into arterioles and arterial capillaries. Arterioles are smaller blood vessels that branch out from larger arteries and lead to the arterial capillaries, which are the smallest blood vessels in the body. The arterial capillaries are connected to the venous capillaries. The arterial side of the capillaries is dropping off oxygen and nutrients to the body's cells. The venous side of the capillaries is picking up metabolic waste from the body's cells. Together they form a network where arteries and veins connect, completing the closed circulatory circuit. The blood flow from the venous capillaries will flow back from the body to the heart through the venous blood vessels. Similar to the arteries, only in reverse, the blood flows from the venous capillaries into a system of veins called the venules. These venules connect to larger veins which carry the blood back from the body to the heart via the largest veins known as the superior and inferior vena cava. Now that we have an understanding of how the blood moves throughout the body, we can discuss what it actually is. Blood is a fluid or liquid known as plasma. Plasma is made up of 90% water, and this is why drinking a sufficient amount of healthy water is absolutely necessary. Blood contains many substances, but the three main substances we will discuss in this video are the three different types of blood cells, each having its own particular function. The first type of blood cell is called erythrocytes. These are known as the red blood cells. Leukocytes are known as the white blood cells, and thrombocytes are the platelets. Now the heart works alone, in that it has its own electrical system designed to work on its own, independent from the nervous system. If the nervous system is damaged and cannot send signals to the skeletal muscles or to other major organs such as the brain, the heart will not be affected because it has its own chemical/electrical system that will continue to pump the blood throughout the body. People with brain damage are placed on life support for breathing, not for pumping or contracting the heart. The only thing that would stop this mechanism is the lack of oxygen or a blockage or direct injury to the heart. The conductive pathway within the heart has 4 main stations through which it sends its electrical impulses in order for the heart to keep beating, which is roughly 100,000 times a day. The first conductive pathway is the SA node. The SA node, known as the pacemaker, is located in the right atria. It starts the spark and passes it on to the next relay station. The AV node is located on the back wall of the heart, between the right atria and the right ventricle. The spark is then passed into the next relay station, the bundle of His, located in the heart's septum, and lastly to the Purkinje fibers, which spread the electrical charge throughout the myocardium, which is the cardiac muscle, and causes the heart to contract, atrius first and then the ventricles. After watching this video, you should now have a basic understanding of what the cardiovascular system is, the basic functions, and the basic structures that define the heart. Here's a quick recap. The cardiovascular or circulatory system is an organ system whose basic purpose is to circulate blood to and from cells in the body in order to transport nutrients and remove waste. The heart pumps the blood to the body through the arteries, which branch off into smaller blood vessels called arterioles. The network of capillaries is where oxygen and other nutrients diffuse from the blood and into the cells. As oxygen and nutrients are diffused into the cells from the arterial capillaries, metabolic waste is diffused into the venous capillaries from the cells. The blood returns to the heart via the veins, where the cycle begins again. And remember that the heart has a beat of its own through the electrochemical circuit system and its 4 relay stations. To sum it all up, the heart pumps blood to the body through the arteries and returns from the body to the heart through the veins. Unfortunately, the heart is also subject to disease and conditions. In fact, the number 1 reason for an early demise is still due to heart failure. These conditions will be discussed further in future CTE videos. Thanks for watching.
After the body has taken the food components that it needs, Waste products are left behind in the bowel and in the blood. The average adult has about 4.5 to 5.5 liters of blood inside their body. Blood is carried into the kidneys by the renal artery. The healthy kidney constantly cleaning about half a cup of blood every minute and getting rid of waste material, toxins, and excess water in the bloodstream. In the kidney, there are millions of tiny blood filters called nephrons. Nephrons are so small, you can see them only with a high-powered microscope. Each nephron is made up of a very small filter called a glomerulus, which is attached to a tubule. As blood passes through the nephron, fluid and waste products are filtered out into the ureters. The ureters are narrow tubes that carry urine from the kidneys to the bladder. Muscles in the ureter walls continually tighten and relax, forcing urine downward, away from the kidneys, not allowing them to back up or stand still. The urine then enters the bladder. The bladder is about the size and shape of a pear when empty. The bladder's walls relax and expand to store urine, allowing urination to be controlled. The normal capacity of the bladder is 400 to 600 milliliters. The bladder has a direct line of communication with the brain. It is full of receptors. An invisible fill line that tells your brain how full your bladder is. When your bladder is full, the nerves alert the person that it is time to urinate. Then the brain signals the bladder muscles to tighten, which squeezes urine out of the bladder. At the same time, the brain signals the sphincter muscles to relax, to let urine exit the bladder through the urethra. Urine is about 95% water and 5% waste products, including urea, creatine, ammonia, and uric acid. The urethral sphincters, either male or female, are two muscular structures that regulate the outflow of urine and help keep urine from leaking by closing tightly.
Excretion. The biological process involved in the removal of harmful metabolic wastes from the body is called excretion. As in other processes like nutrition, respiration, transportation, different organisms use different strategies to do excretion. In case of unicellular organisms, wastes are removed from body surface into the surrounding water by the process called diffusion. But in case of multicellular organisms, specialized organs are evolved to perform excretion. Excretion in human beings. The chief organ that is involved in excretion is kidneys. The excretory system of human beings consists of 1. A pair of kidneys, right kidney and left kidney. 2. A pair of ureters, right ureter and left ureter. 3. A urinary bladder. 4. A urethra. Kidneys are located in the abdomen on either side of the backbone. Kidney is a basic filtration unit. It consists of very thin-walled blood capillaries. Each capillary cluster is associated with cup-shaped end of a tube that collects filtered urine. Each kidney has large number of filtration units called nephrons packed close together. The waste products are nitrogenous wastes that are collected from the blood in the form of urine. The produced urine passes through ureters into urinary bladder. The urine is stored in the urinary bladder and the urine is released to outside through urethra. Now, let us learn how urine is produced. The process of urine formation takes place in 3 steps. 1. Filtration. 2. Reabsorption. 3. Secretion. Filtration. The nitrogenous wastes, such as urea, uric acid, are removed from blood in the kidneys. The process of urine formation takes place in nephron. Reabsorption. Some substances like glucose, amino acids, salts, and major water, which are filtered along with nitrogenous waste, are reabsorbed. The amount of water reabsorbed depends on excess water and dissolved waste along with wastes. Secretion. Reabsorbed components of wastes are secreted into the blood when the urine flows through the tubular part of nephron in the kidney. Mechanism of urination. The urine formed in kidney enters into a lung tube called ureter. The one end of the ureter is connected to kidney and the other end is connected to urinary bladder. Urine is stored in the urinary bladder until the pressure of urinary bladder leads to urge to pass urine. When it reaches the pressure to urge to pass it, urine passes out through urethra. How can we hold urine until it reaches to the urge to pass urine? As the urinary bladder is muscular and it is under the control of nervous system, we can usually control to urge to urinate. The process of passing out urine is called as urination.
Evolved over millions of years. It basically consists of the rectum, the large intestine, the small intestine, the pancreas, the stomach, also called gaster and ventriculus, and the liver with the gallbladder. The esophagus is also part of this system, as well as various salivary glands near the mouth. First, the food is broken up in the mouth by the teeth and then mixed with saliva with the help of the salivary glands. Saliva contains a digestive enzyme called amylase that already begins to digest carbohydrates in the mouth. It splits carbohydrates into smaller units. The ball-like mixture of food with saliva, also known as bolus, is pushed into the throat by the tongue, and finally into the esophagus, which propels the bolus to the stomach. The esophageal lumen, that is, the opening inside the esophagus, is very flexible, which allows boluses of different sizes to be transported. The esophagus consists of several layers. These layers occur throughout the entire digestive tract. The two outer muscle layers are responsible for peristalsis. Through these two muscles, the bolus can be transported from the mouth to the stomach, even if the person is standing on his head. The stomach is often divided into 6 areas. The stomach is composed of a similar structure to the esophagus. It has a longitudinal muscle layer on the outside. Underneath, we can find circular muscle fibers. In addition to this, there is an oblique muscle layer overlaying the mucosa. On the inside, there are rugae that allow the stomach to enlarge when food is consumed. The stomach wall contains gastric glands. They produce mucus, which is able to protect the stomach wall from the secreted gastric acid. Gastric acid is produced by simply smelling or seeing food, but also spices, and the stretching of the stomach causes the secretion, that is, the release of gastric acid. About 1 to 2 liters of gastric juice are produced per day. Since the esophagus does not have a protective mucus layer like the stomach and esophagus are separated by a sphincter. It relaxes when a bolus is pushed from the esophagus into the stomach and then contracts to prevent acid and food from going back up. Gastric juice consists, among other things, of hydrochloric acid, the enzyme pepsin, the intrinsic factor, and lipase for the digestion of fat. In addition to nutrients, food also contains bacteria that can damage the body. The components of hydrochloric acid are able to destroy harmful bacteria. In addition, hydrochloric acid converts pepsinogen, also released by the gastric glands, into pepsin. Pepsin is able to break down proteins in the stomach. For a vitamin B12 absorption in the small intestine, the intrinsic factor is needed, which is produced by the gastric glands. The vitamin must combine with intrinsic factor, then it can be absorbed later by the small intestine. Vitamin B12 helps keep the body's nerve and blood cells healthy and helps make DNA. It also contains gastric lipase, an acid-resistant enzyme for fat digestion. In the stomach, gastric lipase splits a triglyceride into a free fatty acid and a diglyceride, whereby only the free fatty acid can be absorbed by the body. More effective fat digestion takes place in the small intestine. Through gastric juice and stomach movements, which take place approximately every 20 seconds, the individual boluses are mixed to a semi-fluid mass of partly digested food, the so-called chyme. The chyme cannot enter the duodenum at first because there is a sphincter at the stomach exit. The pyloric sphincter resembles the esophageal sphincter. The pyloric sphincter opens only a few millimeters, so that larger pieces remain inside the stomach. In the first section of the small intestine, the duodenum, bile, and pancreatic secretions are mixed with the chyme via the ampulla of Vater. Pancreatic juice contains numerous digestive proenzymes and enzymes. In order for these to do their job, A higher pH value than that in the stomach is necessary. For this reason, pancreatic juice contains sodium hydrogen carbonate. Hydrogen carbonate is able to neutralize the acid in the chyme and thus produce the optimum pH value of 7 or 8. Pancreatic juice also contains proenzymes. It is only through enterokinase, released by the duodenum wall, that the proenzyme trypsinogen becomes trypsin, which can split proteins and activate other trypsinogens. We also find alpha amylase, which we had already found in the mouth. It now does the rest regarding the splitting of carbohydrates, which it converts into maltose and isomaltose. Furthermore, pancreatic lipase is able to split triglycerides into 2 free fatty acids. The gastric lipase, as we have seen before, can produce only 1 free fatty acid. The pancreatic lipase can cleave triglycerides excellently because the bile breaks the fats down into tiny droplets. This is called emulsification. Numerous other enzymes are part of pancreatic juice, but these will not be explained in detail here. Bile is produced by the liver cells and transported to the gallbladder. The bile is stored in the gallbladder and finally added to the food in the duodenum via the ampulla of Vater. The pancreas also releases juice via the ampulla of Vater. The small intestine consists of 3 sections: duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. The ileum continues into the large intestine in the right lower abdomen. The duodenum and the jejunum have circular folds to increase the contact surface with the food. These circular folds extend about 1 centimeter into the lumen of the small intestine. These folds are covered with small finger-like projections called villi. Villi increase the surface considerably. Villi are about 1 millimeter long. Each villus contains blood capillaries and a lymphatic capillary called lacteal, which we will see later. The nutrients, marked green here, are absorbed by the villus and transferred to the blood capillaries. Some nutrients, such as glucose, do not require a carrier. They are transported freely in the bloodstream. Other nutrients, such as iron, require transport proteins like transferrin. Fats are transported by chylomicrons, which are lipoproteins. The triglycerides to be transported are virtually enclosed in the lipoprotein. Chylomicrons and triglycerides are then transported through the lacteal of the villus. Each villus is covered by even smaller microvilli. They multiply the intestinal surface considerably. The microvilli absorb nutrients and transport them to the inside. The last part of the small intestine is the ileum. It does not have, unlike the duodenum and jejunum, circular folds. The ileum absorbs electrolytes, such as calcium, for building bones, hair, and teeth. Trace elements, such as zinc, for sperm production and the immune system. Vitamins, such as B12, for the formation and maturation of red blood cells. And remaining bile acid, which is transported back to the liver via the bloodstream. As with the esophagus, the food is transported by peristalsis. In contrast, segmentation contractions serve to mix the chyme, which is shown here in yellow and red, to make it easier to see the mixing process. The large intestine is thicker than the small intestine. It is about 1 meter long and surrounds the small intestine. The small intestine is connected to the large intestine via the Bowheen's valve. It opens when chyme is to pass from the small intestine to the large intestine. The large intestine does not have any villi like the small intestine because most digestible substances have already been absorbed in the small intestine. However, the large intestine has an estimated 100 billion bacteria inside. They are important for many other tasks, such as the production of vitamins and the decomposition of fiber for the body's energy production. Many of these bacteria are an important part of the immune system by killing harmful germs. Through peristalsis, the chyme is transported from the ascending colon to the transverse colon to the descending colon. On its way through the large intestine, water is removed from the chyme. Furthermore, mucus is added for proper excretion of waste. Substances that cannot be absorbed through the small intestine or the large intestine remain in the rectum and are finally excreted through the anus.
The skeleton is the framework of the body. Without it, the body would be without form and it wouldn't even be possible to walk upright. Among its many functions, the skeleton serves to protect vital organs such as the brain, the heart, and the lungs. One field of study that bones are very important to is forensic anthropology. But before we can become forensic anthropologists like we see on TV, we need to learn all about the skeleton. We'll provide a complete, in-depth study of the skeletal system in other CTE videos, but for now, we'll just be doing a brief overview of the skeletal system as a whole. The skeleton is divided into two major sections, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The first section we'll cover is the axial skeleton. This forms the main trunk of the body and consists of the skull, spinal column, ribs, and sternum. The sternum is the breastbone, and the skull is composed of 8 different bones. The spinal column is also known as the vertebral. There are 26 vertebrae in the spinal column and an intervertebral disc between each. The vertebral or spinal column's function is to protect the spinal cord. The main function of the invertebral disc is to act as a shock absorber between each vertebra. The costae, or ribs, are composed of 24 ribs, or 12 pairs of ribs. There are 7 pairs of true ribs and 5 pairs of false ribs, of which the last 2 pairs are called the floating ribs. The rib's main function is to protect vital organs such as the heart, major blood vessels, and the lungs. These bones are also responsible for the production, or creation of blood. The medical term for this is hematopoiesis. The second major section of the skeletal system is called the appendicular skeleton. This section forms the extremities of the body, which are the shoulder girdle, arm bones, pelvic girdle, and the leg bones. The shoulder girdle is comprised of 4 bones. It's made up of 2 clavicles, known as the collarbones, and 2 scapulas, which are known as the shoulder bones. Together, these bones form the shoulder girdle, to which the arm bones attach to. The arm is composed of 3 bones. The upper bone is known as the humerus. This is categorized as a long bone. The lower bones, of which there are 2, are called the radius and the ulna. Attached to the radius and ulna are the wrist bones, otherwise known as the 8 carpals. Attached to the 8 carpals are the hand bones, and the hand bones are comprised of 5 metacarpals, which form the palm of the hand, and the 14 phalanges, which form the fingers, including the thumbs. The pelvic girdle is the structure to which the leg bones are attached. The pelvic girdle is made up of 2 os coxae, or hip bones. Each hip bone is divided into 3 sections: the ilium, the ischium, and the symphysis, or pubis. The leg bones are attached to the pelvic sockets, called the acetabulums. Each leg consists of 1 femur, or thigh bone. It is in the upper leg and is also categorized as a long bone. Between the upper and lower leg is the patella, or kneecap. And the lower leg is composed of the tibia and fibula. The tibia is known as the shin bone, and the fibula runs parallel to it. Attached to the lower leg are the 7 tarsals known as the ankle bones. Attached to the ankle bones are the 5 metatarsals. And attached to these bones are the 14 phalanges, which are the toes. And last but not least of the leg bones is the heel of the foot. This is known as the calcaneus. Long bones are hard, dense bones that provide strength, structure, and mobility. An example is the femur, or thigh bone. Here's the anatomical makeup of a long bone. A long bone has a shaft and 2 ends. The shaft is known as the diaphysis, and the 2 ends are called the proximal epiphysis and the distal epiphysis. The medullary canal is a cavity in the diaphysis, which is filled with yellow marrow. The endosteum is a membrane that lines the medullary canal and keeps the yellow marrow intact. The outside of the bone is covered with a tough membrane called the periosteum. Joints are formed where 2 or more bones are joined together. The joints are divided into 3 major categories defined as to how these joints move. Diarthrosis, or synovial, means freely movable. An example would be the arm socket, or the ball and socket of shoulder and hips. Amphiarthrosis is slightly movable. An example of this would be the vertebrae. And synarthrosis is immovable. An example of an immovable joint would be the sutures or joints of the cranium. Ligaments and cartilage are important supportive structures for the joint. Thanks for watching our overview of the skeletal system. For a more in-depth and detailed study and videos
skull, scapula, humerus, ulna, radius, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, sternum, ribs, vertebrae, pelvis, sacrum, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges, skull, scapula, humerus, sternum, ribs, vertebrae, ulna, radius, carpals, phalanges, metacarpals, pelvis, sacrum, femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges.
The great and mighty nervous system, or the brain as most of us call it. What makes this organ unique is that within it lies the ability for humans to know oneself. This feature distinguishes and sets the human species apart from the rest of creation. This ability is known as consciousness or intelligence. To begin, let's look at the primary function of the nervous system. The basic purpose is to coordinate all of the activities of the body. It enables the body to respond and adapt to changes that occur both inside and outside the body. Now, the nervous system is actually split into two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. We'll explore the peripheral later, but first, let's look at the central nervous system. The central nervous system is made up of two major structures: the brain and the spinal cord. As most people know, the brain is found within the cranium or skull, and there are 6 main sections among other structures within it. These 6 sections are the cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, the midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. The first section is the cerebrum. This is the largest section. It's divided into 2 major hemispheres, which are the right and left hemisphere. And the cerebrum is further divided into 4 lobes. These 4 lobes are the frontal, the parietal, the temporal, and the occipital. The frontal lobe is primarily responsible for reasoning and thought. The parietal is primarily responsible for integrating sensory information. The temporal is primarily responsible for processing auditory information from the ears. And the occipital is primarily responsible for processing visual information from the eyes. The second section of the brain is the cerebellum. This is the section located in the back of the head, below the cerebrum, and above the first cervical of the neck. It is responsible for muscle coordination, balance, posture, and muscle tone. The diencephalon section is found between the cerebrum and the midbrain. It contains 2 structures, the thalamus and the hypothalamus. The thalamus behaves much like a relay station and directs sensory impulses to the cerebrum. And the hypothalamus controls and regulates autonomic nervous system functions such as temperature, appetite, water balance, sleep, and blood vessel constriction and dilation. The hypothalamus also plays a role in the emotions such as anger, fear, pleasure, pain, and affection. The midbrain section is located below the cerebrum at the top of the brainstem. It is responsible for certain eye and auditory reflexes. The pons is located below the midbrain and in the brainstem. It is responsible for certain reflex actions such as chewing, tasting, and saliva production. And the last section is the medulla oblongata. It's the lowest part of the brainstem, and it connects with the spinal cord and is responsible for regulating heart and blood vessel function, digestion, respiration, swallowing, coughing, sneezing, and blood pressure. It's also known as the center for respiration. Now that we've covered the brain, let's take a look at the other half of the central nervous system, the spinal cord. The spinal cord is the link between the brain and the nerves and the rest of the body. The spinal cord is divided into 4 different regions: the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and the afferent and efferent spinal nerves, which merge to form the peripheral nerves. The afferent spinal nerves are responsible for carrying information from the body to the brain. And the efferent spinal nerves are responsible for carrying information from the brain to the body. Now, within this elaborate system of nerves, neurons, and dendrites, there is a system that regulates the functions of the central nervous system, which lie outside its major components, such as the brain and the spinal cord. This system is known as the peripheral nervous system and is subdivided into 2 smaller systems: the somatic system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is responsible for carrying motor and sensory information both to and from the central nervous system. This system is made up of nerves that connect to the skin, sensory organs, and all skeletal muscles. The somatic system is also responsible for nearly all voluntary muscle movements, as well as for processing sensory information that arrives via external stimuli including hearing, touch, and sight. The structures that allow this communication to happen between the nerves throughout the body and the central nervous system are known as the afferent sensory neurons and the efferent motor neurons. Now, afferent simply means conducting inward, and efferent means conducting outward. So just like in the spinal nerves, the afferent neurons take information from the nerves to the central nervous system, and the efferent neurons take information from the central nervous system to the muscle fibers throughout the body. The autonomic nervous system is further divided into the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is vital to our survival. Have you ever heard of the fight or flight response to danger? The sympathetic nervous system revs up the body when confronted with imminent danger to either defend yourself or to escape the threat. The parasympathetic nervous system is the counterbalance to the sympathetic response to danger, whether real or imagined. Once the threat is gone, the parasympathetic brings all the systems of the body back to normal. Now at this point, you should have a basic understanding of the nervous system, but let's do a quick recap. The basic purpose of the nervous system is to coordinate all the activities of the body. It enables the body to respond and adapt to changes that occur both inside and outside the body. The 2 major parts to the nervous system are the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is also divided into 2 major structures, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain is found within the skull or cranium, and it is made up of 6 main sections. These 6 sections are the cerebrum, cerebellum, diencephalon, the midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. The other half of the central nervous system is the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is the link between the brain and the nerves and the rest of your body. The spinal cord is divided into 4 different regions: the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and afferent and efferent spinal nerves, which merge to form the peripheral nerves. Now that we know the brain and spinal cord primarily make up the central nervous system, let's look at the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is essentially the nervous system outside of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is then subdivided into 2 smaller systems called the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. So, as you can see, the nervous system is quite complex, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. Thanks for watching. Look for more videos on the nervous system at CTE Skills.
Tissue. Objective: to learn about the nervous tissue and its functions. If a person unknowingly touches a hot object like a kettle, she immediately pulls back her hand. Why does she do this? This happens as the receptors present in the fingers sense the heat from the kettle. The sensory nerves in the fingers absorb this impulse and transmit it to the spinal cord. From the spinal cord, this impulse passes to the motor neuron, which in turn passes this impulse to the affected muscle in the finger, and the person immediately removes her hand from the kettle. This whole process involves coordination among the nerve cells called neurons. These neurons are found inside the spinal cord and the brain. Now let's learn about neurons. A neuron consists of a cell body called soma. The soma is enclosed by the cell membrane and has a nucleus. There are several thin, thread-like extensions from the cell body called dendrites. The dendrites receive impulses from the adjoining neurons. The other extension from the cell body or soma is a single-branched extension called an axon. Each axon is comprised of a cone-shaped base called an axon hillock that arises from the soma. At the other end, the axon is divided into many branches, from where the signal passing through the axon is transmitted to the other cell via a junction called a synapse. Thus, the information is received by the dendrites and is then sent out through the axon to the neighboring cell. This is how information is transmitted from one cell to another. To summarize, if we unknowingly touch a hot object, we immediately pull our hand away from it. This process involves coordination among the nerve cells called neurons. A neuron consists of a cell body called soma. There are several thin, thread-like extensions from the cell body called dendrites. The other extension from the cell body or soma is a single-branched extension called an axon.
properties of individual neurons. We learned how electrical forces and diffusion give rise to membrane potentials, and we learned how cells can generate and propagate signals called action potentials, or spikes, along the membrane. Understanding the properties of the neuronal membrane is essential, but understanding just these properties isn't sufficient to give us insight into collective behavior of the billions of connected neurons in our brains. Luckily for us, we can approach neuroscience at many different scales and levels of analysis, and we don't have to confront the full complexity of everything all at once. That's what we'll be exploring throughout the rest of this course as we slowly go from our understanding of single molecules, such as ion channels, to the electrical behavior of neurons, to their collective behavior in small circuits, and finally onto how they become organized in large functional regions of the brain. Let's start simple though. Since we've examined one neuron, a logical next question is, how do two neurons connect with one another? We'll first examine some basic cellular anatomy of neurons. So far, we haven't made too much of the fact that the majority of neurons are polarized cells. That is, they have one portion of the cell for receiving inputs and another portion for sending outputs. The parts of the cells that are specialized for receiving inputs from other cells are called dendrites. The word dendrite comes from the Greek word dendron, meaning tree, and as you can see, the dendrites have a branching, tree-like structure. A signal received by a dendrite is passed to the cell body. If there is sufficient depolarization of the cell body membrane to initiate an action potential, then an action potential is sent down the axon. The axon then carries the propagating action potential to another neuron. So what actually happens at the boundary between two neurons, between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of another? This interface is called a synapse. There are two general types of synapses: electrical synapses and chemical synapses. Electrical synapses are less common in our own nervous systems, but they're simpler to think about, so let's start with them. Electrical synapses are basically pores between two cells that allow ions to pass through. They allow the passage of the electrical signal through to a neighboring cell without much fuss. It's not so different than just combining two cells into one larger cell. There are lots of reasons that nature might need synapses like this from time to time. They're fast and they allow cells to couple together with a high degree of synchronicity. But most neurons are connected together by a much more complicated structure called a chemical synapse. In a chemical synapse, rather than simply passing along an electrical signal from one cell to another, the action potential travels to the end of the axon and causes a chemical to be released into a very small space between the two neurons called the synaptic cleft. This chemical is taken up by the downstream neuron on the other side of the cleft. This chemical signal can cause the downstream neuron to depolarize its membrane, converting the chemical signal back into an electrical one. Or it can have other effects on the cell. This chemical step is slower than transmission across an electrical synapse, but it opens up an enormously diverse repertoire of different and more complex kinds of signaling. And synaptic function plays a critical role in computations performed by neurons. We'll spend the rest of this unit exploring the inner workings of chemical synapses, on our way to beginning to look at how networks of interconnected neurons give rise to behavior. We'll also look at the role of defective synaptic physiology in neurological and psychiatric disorders, and we'll see how synapses can be targeted by various psychoactive drugs and poisons. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at how synapses can change over time in response to external stimuli, playing a foundational role in how we learn and remember.
Now that we have completed the mapping of the body, we will now begin our journey through each of the body's systems, of which there are 12. Our first journey begins with the integumentary system. This body system is divided into three major parts: the skin, the hair, and the nails. This system is known as a membrane because it covers the body, and an organ because it contains several tissues. For the purposes of this course, this system will be described as an organ with a variety of essential tissues. The skin is composed by three main layers: epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. The epidermis is the outermost layer of skin. This layer is further divided into 5 to 6 thinner layers which do not have blood vessels. Only 2 of these layers of the skin will be described. Stratum corneum. This is the uppermost layer of the skin, which constantly sheds, or where the dead skin cells are sloughed off. Essentially, the top layer of the skin is composed of dead cells. Stratum germinativum. The stratum germinativum is the lowest layer of the epidermis and is in contact with the dermis below. It is the layer in which cell division called mitosis takes place, and where new epidermal tissue is formed and begins to migrate to the surface of the skin, replacing the dead skin cells found in the stratum corneum. Dermis, also known as the corium or the true skin. This layer contains major structures and functions for the skin within a framework of elastic connective tissue. This is where the skin comes to life. Contained within the dermis are the blood vessels, nerves, involuntary muscles, sweat glands, oil glands, hair follicles, and the papilla. Blood vessels. Via the capillaries, nutrients are provided to the skin and waste products are taken away. These blood vessels also play a major part in maintaining and sustaining the body's temperature for optimal functioning. The vessels dilate to release heat, or they constrict in order to retain the body's heat. Nerves allow the skin to have sensory perception. Through the skin, the body is able to respond to pain, pressure, temperature, as well as touch sensations. Involuntary muscles in the dermis control functions such as lifting hair or opening pores. By dilating or opening the pores in the skin, the body is able to cool off and allow sweat to exit. When the body needs to keep its temperature up to prevent heat loss, these muscles allow the pores in the skin to contract or constrict in order to keep the heat from exiting the body. In fact, if it's too cold, these pores can constrict so tightly that they form what is known as goosebumps. These structures are important for keeping and maintaining the body's temperature, which averages at 98.6 degrees. This helps maintain the process of homeostasis. Homeostasis is a major process by which the body works to keep all of its structures and functions in balance. Another way of saying it would be to keep the body healthy. Sweat glands, or sudoriferous glands, are coiled tubes that extend through the dermis and open on the surface of the skin at the pores. The sweat, or perspiration, eliminated by these glands contain water, salt, and some body wastes. Oil, or sebaceous glands, usually open onto hair follicles. These glands produce sebum, an oil that keeps the skin and hair from becoming dry. However, due to genetics, some people's hair is more dry than others. The dryness is determined by whether or not the hair is curly. The curlier the hair, the drier the hair, even when the amount of sebum produced is the same. A hair follicle anchors each hair into the skin, deep into the dermis. The hair bulb forms the base of the hair follicle. In the hair bulb, living cells divide and grow to build the hair shaft. The hair shaft is the hair that projects from the skin or scalp. Papilla. The top of the dermis is covered with papilla, which fits into the ridges right below the stratum germinativum. The papilla are responsible for creating fingerprints and footprints. Like a snowflake, no one fingerprint is created twice, not even in twins. Subcutaneous fascia, or hypodermis. This structure is located below the dermis, or the bottom of the innermost layer of the skin. It is made of elastic and fibrous connective tissue and adipose, which is fatty tissue. The purpose for this layer is to connect the skin to the underlying muscles. Adipose, or fat, is the yellowish section found in this layer. We can compare our skin to a piece of cake. Epidermis is the frosting. The dermis is the cake itself. And the subcutaneous, or hypodermis, is the bottom of the cake connecting to the pan. Now, the hair is the second major part of the integumentary system. The hair's main function is to protect the skin. Hair is composed of a strong structural protein called keratin. The hair grows within a hollow tube called the follicle. Here's a little hair trivia for you. Hair can be shaved, cut, styled, and groomed. But why doesn't it hurt when you cut your hair? The answer is, it doesn't hurt when the hair is cut because there are no nerves. But then why does it hurt when you pluck your eyebrow or pull a hair out of the scalp? That's because at the base of the hair follicle are sensory nerve fibers that wrap around each hair bulb. Alright, the third major part of the integumentary system is the nail. The nail's main function is to serve the fingers and toes as protective plates and enhance the sensation of the fingertip or the toe tip. Like the hair, the nail is also composed of keratin. Primarily, the nail is made up of dead epithelial cells packed tightly together to form a translucent, thick, dense surface of keratin. The nail is formed in the nail bed. If you slam your finger in the door, you may lose a nail, but it will regrow. If you damage the nail bed, however, that nail will never come back. Before we conclude part 1 of the integumentary system, let's review. There are 3 main parts to this body system: the skin, the hair, and the nails. And the skin has 3 main layers: the epidermis, which is the outermost layer, the dermis, which is just below the epidermis and contains major structures and functions for the skin within a framework of elastic connective tissue. And third, the subcutaneous fascia, or hypodermis, which is the innermost layer. Next, we covered the hair, whose main function is to protect the skin. And the third major part of the integumentary system is the nails, which serve the fingers and toes as protective plates and enhance the sensation of fingertip or toe tip. In our next video, we will be covering the functions of the integumentary system. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in part 2.
Okay, open your eyes and let the world in. Follow me on a journey into your body's second most complex organ after the brain. But pay attention now, all of this will happen in the blink of an eye. First job at hand, get inside. Let's follow this dust particle. It floats up and lands on the cornea. That's the outer dome covering your eye. You can feel its shape right now. Close your lids, put your index finger over them, wash your hands first, and move your eyes side to side. Feel that bump? That's it. No blood vessels here. Your corneas get oxygen directly from the air, so your eyes breathe. But it's full of super sensitive nerves. They sense something foreign, and the fastest muscles in your body get to work. Your eye blinks. That dust particle gets washed away. Let's try this again. The only way to get into the eye is with light. That's how your vision works, and it's why you can't see in the dark. Duh. But how do we see objects that don't emit light themselves? The light coming from the source, be it a light bulb or the sun, hits the object. Some of it gets absorbed, and some of it bounces off and enters our eye. It's a nice reflection on you. More on that a bit later. For now, it's way too dark in this room. Somebody flip a switch. Ah, that's better. We zoom along, going the speed of light, and pass through the cornea. It's dome-shaped to help focus light where it goes next, the lens. But before we get there, we pass through the pupil. It's not a black circle in your eyeball, it's a hole. Black because there's no light inside your eye. Red eye in flash photos is because the light from the camera is passing through and bouncing off the back of your eye. It's full of blood vessels in there, so your pupils glow red. But this pupil's too small, I can barely squeeze through. Ow, the light's too bright. The tiny muscles in your irises, that's the colored part of your eye we know and admire, have relaxed to make the pupil smaller. This doesn't let too much light in and protects your eyes from excessive brightness. Turn the lights down a little, and the iris muscles contract. The pupil gets bigger as the eye demands more light to be let through. There we go! We pass through and come upon the aspirin-sized lens. Like your ears and nose, your lens continues to grow throughout your whole life. And just like in a camera, it focuses the light even more. That way, it hits exactly where it needs to be on the retina. That's the back of the eye. I can see our human here is nearsighted. Things far away are blurry. Look at where the lens is focusing the light into a single point. It's not on the retina, but a little before it. This happens when your eye is slightly too long. If you're farsighted, things up close are blurry, that focal point goes behind the eye because your eyeball's too short. Don't worry, it's nothing a pair of glasses can't fix. Ooh, it's roomier in here than I thought. Hello? Well, it's because you only see about 1/6 of your eye when you look in the mirror. The rest of it is inside your head. Your eyes themselves are about the size of ping pong balls. And just within this seemingly small little organ, there are over 2 million working parts. Whoa, hold on. Everything's shifting to the right. Whoa, now to the left. Our human must be looking for something. Your eyes move thanks to 6 muscles holding them in the socket. Certain ones contract, and your glance changes direction. Up, down, left, right, all around. Okay, things have calmed down, so let's continue following the light projection. Say you're looking at a big bright apple sitting on a blue table. A yellow light bulb hangs above. If you could see the image in here, it'd be upside down on the back screen of your eye. It's because the lens bent the beam. But you can't see this picture on the retina because eyes aren't projectors. It's just light hitting some tissue on the back wall of your eyeball. There are nerves and special receptors back there. They turn the light coming into your eye into nerve impulses the brain then decodes and makes sense of. So, we journey further. Here are those receptors. They can be cones or rods. Cones are the reason your incredible eye can detect up to 7 million colors. Surprisingly though, your cones come in only 3 types: red, green, and blue. It's the combination of their work that allows you to see magenta, chartreuse, or cyan. Except for colorblind people. They might be missing one of those types, or they don't work as they should. So these people don't see certain colors at all, or things aren't true to their color. For example, if there's something wrong with your green-sensitive cones, green and yellow look reddish-brown. There are also your rods. They pick up black, white, and over 500 shades of gray in between. Way more than 50 shades of gray. You also have more of them than cones, and the rods are mostly in charge of your peripherals. Yep, everything outside your direct field of vision looks like old black and white TV. Rods also help you see in low light. The photoreceptors in your eyes are so sensitive, they can even project an image when it's not even there. Ever looked at a bright light, closed your eyes or turn off the light, and you can still see the shape of that light bulb floating before your eyes? That's your photoreceptors continuing to send visual information to your brain. Your rods and cones are connected to neurons, so the data gets passed there and makes its way to your optic nerve. This is where blood vessels and the main path to the brain enter and exit the eyeball. This is also where your blind spot is. There are no rods or cones here. You can test it too. Grab a piece of paper and a pen. I'll wait. Okay, make a dot on the left side and a plus about a hand's length to the right of it. Hold the paper at arm's length, close your right eye, and stare at the plus sign. The dot will disappear because it's in your blind spot. If it doesn't, move the paper closer or further away until the dot disappears. Do the same thing with your left eye closed and stare at the dot with your right eye. The plus sign will vanish when it enters your blind spot. You don't notice these spots because your brain fills in the missing information. So, we travel along the optic nerve and into the message decoder, your brain. Ow! Shocked me. Oh yeah, we're in the nervous system now. So we're traveling with electric impulses. The optic nerve leads into your brain's visual cortex. This is where that upside-down image gets translated into something we understand. That's a blue table with a red apple sitting on it. A yellow light shines above. And your brain knows up and down thanks to your ears. Well, your balance system, which is mostly in your ears. Anyway, the brain is also where missing puzzle pieces, like the stuff in your blind spot, gets filled in with information based on its vast collection of archives. The dot on the left is my blind spot, so I'll just fill in the missing space and make it look like the paper continues seamlessly there. But our journey didn't start when we entered the eye with light. It started when light from a source bounced off an object and then into the eye. Why do we see different colors? Because visible light travels in different wavelengths. That red apple on the table absorbs other colors and reflects red-white waves, also pronounced as red light waves. The table reflects blue and so on. Black objects absorb all the light, and white things reflect most of it. Those reflected waves hit cones and rods sensitive to them, and your world is filled with color, especially red-white waves.
We learned that objects are visible because of the light getting reflected from their surfaces. This reflected light enters our eyes and we see that object. What happens inside the human eye when the light rays enter it? What is it that helps us see the things around us? The human eye is roughly spherical in shape. What we're going to do in this video is understand the different parts of the eye in short, not in extreme detail. Let's begin. The outer layer of the eye is called the cornea. It's white in color and transparent. Transparent? Yes, it means that it allows light to pass through it. In fact, cornea refracts or bends the light passing through it. And much of the refraction inside the eye is done by cornea. But wait, it not only refracts light but also protects the inner parts of the eye. It acts like a tough front wall of the eye, protecting the interior of the eye from accidents, and also does not allow foreign particles to enter. Okay, so this was all about the outer layer of the eye. Let's now talk about the things present inside. Behind the cornea, there's a dark muscular structure called the iris. Iris determines the color of the eye. For instance, when we say that a person has blue eyes, it means that the color of the iris of the person's eye is blue. Now there is a small opening at the center of the iris for the light to enter. Do you know what it's called? It's called the pupil. The iris actually acts like a shutter of a camera. It controls the amount of light entering the eye by enlarging or shrinking and thereby adjusting the size of the pupil. For example, when you focus the light from the torch directly into a person's eye, the iris shrinks. This is because the intensity of light is too much for the eyes to bear. The shrinking iris stops the unwanted light from entering through the pupil. And when there's less light, it expands, allowing more light to enter through the pupil. Okay, what happens next? The light that enters through the pupil falls on the lens kept behind. The lens is a convex lens. Convex lens is a lens which is thicker at the center than the edges. It's a converging lens. That is, it focuses all the light at one point. In a normal regular eye, this point is somewhere here on this inner boundary called retina. Why do I say a normal eye? Well, in a defective eye, this point of focus may lie either in front of the retina or behind the retina. We will talk about this defect of eye in our future videos, but first, let's go back to our normal eye where light is focused on the retina. Retina is at the back of the eye and marks the inner layer of the eyeball. Retina contains lots of nerve cells that sense the light. The nerve cells are of two kinds, namely cones, which are sensitive to bright light, and rods, which are sensitive to dim light. The message or sensation is then transferred to the brain along the optic nerve. Okay, let's quickly recap what we learned about the human eye. Human eye has a roughly spherical shape. The outer part of an eye, called the cornea, is a thick white transparent wall which protects the eye from accidents and keeps the foreign particles from entering inside. Behind the cornea, the colorful part of the eye, called the iris, is present. It has a small opening at the center called pupil. Iris controls the light entering through the pupil by contracting and expanding. Behind the pupil, there is a converging lens which focuses the light on retina. Retina consists of two types of nerve cells, namely cones and rods. They transfer the message through the optic nerve. There is a lot of information to digest. In the next video, we will talk more about this lens present inside the eye and will also discuss its functioning.
Respiration. In human beings, air is taken into body through nostril of nose. The respiratory organ is present within the body, and the organ is covered by a surface which is very fine and delicate, and the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide takes place across this surface. The structure of the organ increases its surface area when it is in contact with oxygen-rich atmosphere, and there are passages that takes air into organ. And there is a mechanism for moving air in and air out. Let us learn the mode of respiration in lungs from the following diagram. Air enters into body through nostrils of nose. The nostrils consists of fine hairs that lines the passage, the way through which air passes, and also lined with mucus. What is the use of fine hair and mucus lining in the nostril passage? The fine hair of nostrils filter the air from dust, dirt, and microorganisms, and mucus also traps the dirt and facilitates smooth flow of air with its moist characteristic. Then the air passes through throat. The throat, also called as windpipe or trachea, which is surrounded by rings of cartilage. What is the necessary of rings of cartilage? ROC helps in free, unrestricted flow of air through windpipe and helps in preventing air passage from collapse. If cartilage rings are absent, then it increases pressure during exhalation on compression of rib cage, and windpipe will be closed, restricts airflow and interfere normal breathing. Through throat, air passes into lungs. Within lungs, the passage divides into smaller and smaller tubes and finally ends with balloon-like structures which are called as alveoli. The alveoli is the surface where exchange of gases take place. The wall of alveoli consists of network of blood vessels. As we all know, when we breathe in, we lift out ribs. Then diaphragm flattens, followed by chest cavity becomes larger, and that gives air is sucked into lungs, and alveoli is filled with air. And then blood carries CO2 from all parts of the body and releases CO2 into alveoli. And that proceeds to the oxygen that is present in the alveoli is taken by blood by alveolar blood vessels. And finally, oxygen is transported to all cells of the body through blood vessels.
Let me introduce you to one of the bravest pioneers in the history of life.
With the oral vestibule, which remember consists of the external borders, which is the lips and the cheeks, and the inner borders, which are the teeth and the gums. Now let's wrap up the anatomy of the oral cavity by going through the anatomical structures associated with the oral cavity proper. And to do that, we need to go through the borders of the oral cavity first. First, we have the anterior and lateral border, which are the alveolar process of the gums as well as the teeth. We already covered them in the last video, since the teeth and the gums are also the internal borders of the oral vestibule. Superiorly, however, you will find the hard palate and the soft palate. The inferior border consists of the floor of the oral cavity, which is made up of three muscles, the mylohyoid anterior belly of the gastricus and the genohyoid muscle. And you will find the tongue here as well in the inferior border. Posteriorly, the oral cavity will continue into the pharynx through the oropharyngeal isthmus. So our goal in this video is to go through all the structures associated with the borders here. We already looked at the anterior and the lateral border in our last video, but now let's start with the superior border, which consists of the palate. The palate is kind of a horizontal partition separating the oral cavity from the nasal cavity. The ventral part is formed by the bony hard palate. It's hard because it primarily contains bone. The dorsal part is called soft palate, and it's formed primarily by tendons. The soft palate is used primarily during swallowing, and I'll show you how in a minute, but now let's go through the hard palate first. The anterior part of the hard palate consists of the alveolar processes of the maxilla, and the posterior part is made up of the horizontal plate of the palate bone. Now the hard palate is bone, and just like the rest of the body, all bones are usually covered by the periosteum, as you see here. And externally to the periosteum, you will find a mucous membrane, which contains minor salivary glands called palatine glands. These palatine glands, they continuously produce a minor amount of saliva to keep the inner environment of the mouth wet. Now when you look at the hard palate, there are some distinct structures you can actually highlight here. First, we have the incisive papilla, which is a small elevation on the mucosa that lies on top of the incisive canal. You can feel it as a very small elevation here in this region. Then in the midline, we can see the palatine raphe, which is a ridge running in the midline here. And then there's the transverse palatine folds, which are a transverse mucosal fold on the oral side of the palate. So that's everything for the anatomy of the hard palate. Now let's go through the soft palate. So the soft palate, again, is this posterior flappy part that doesn't contain any bone. In Latin, you will sometimes see the soft palate as being referred to as the velum palatinum, as described as the free part on the backside of the palate. But essentially, when we talk about the velum palatinum, we generally mean the middle part of the soft palate. But the posterior end of the soft palate is free. It's called the uvula. It's the thing dingling around the backside of your mouth here. Now, what makes up the soft palate? First, I want you to imagine that you have a bag. And this bag is made up of mucosal membrane. And within the bag, you will find muscles or muscle tissue. You will also find a lot of fibers that clump together and form a structure called the palatine aponeurosis. And the palatine aponeurosis functions as an attachment point for many of the muscles related with the soft palate. Other things you will find within the bag are vasculature, arteries, veins, nerves, and lymph tissue. All of them go under this category, but you'll also find mucosal glands or palatine glands similar to the hard palate. And this bag that we just imagined resembles the soft palate and all structures associated with it. So why do we have the soft palate and why is it so important? Well, first thing is that it's involved in the swallowing process. So imagine you're about to take a large bite of this hamburger, but you're so hungry you end up eating the whole thing in one go. And when you're ready to swallow it, there are actually 4 directions it can go through. One thing is that it can go into the nasal cavity through the nasal part of the pharynx, or it can get pushed back into the mouth, or it can go down through the larynx and the trachea and down to your lungs, or it can go into the esophagus and then down further into the stomach. The esophagus is where we want to push the food, so the actual swallowing process involves cutting off the other 3 pathways. So the 3 steps in swallowing involves the tongue blocking the oral cavity, the soft palate blocking the nasal cavity, and the epiglottis going down and blocking the larynx. Now we only have one pathway left, which is through the esophagus. And here to further help you imagine it through an x-ray, this is a person swallowing water. Did you catch that? Here in slow motion, you will see the tongue going up, the soft palate blocking for the nasopharynx, and the epiglottis blocking the larynx. So that's the main function of the soft palate. The other thing you need to know about it is that it serves as an attachment point for 5 different muscles. So let's go through these muscles. And to do that, we're first going to make a vertical cut like this and remove the backside and then look from this perspective. We will see this. So we have the sphenoid bone. We can see the nasal cavity with the septum here in the middle. We can see the tongue. We can see the uvula. And we can see the horizontal plate of the palate bone. Awesome. So let's use this model to go through the 5 muscles attached to the soft palate. The first muscle is the muscle of the uvula, which is this one. It originates from the palate bone, as you see here, and it inserts at the mucosal membrane of the uvula, and its function is to shorten and elevate the uvula. Then we have a muscle called the levator veli palatini, which is this one. This muscle originates from the petrous part of the temporal bone, as well as from the auditory tube, and it inserts at the palatine aponeurosis, and its function is to elevate the soft palate. Notice that the auditory tube is involved, so when you swallow, it's also going to open up the auditory tube to a certain extent and release some pressure off the middle ear. So levator elevates the soft palate, and then we have the tensor veli palatini, which tenses the soft palate. It looks like this, and it originates from the spine of the sphenoid bone, from the medial lamina of the pterygoid bone, as well as the auditory tube, and it inserts at the palatine aponeurosis. Its function is to tense the soft palate, as well as widening the auditory tube to release some pressure off the middle ear. Then there's the palatoglossus muscle, which is this one. This muscle will originate from the palatine aponeurosis and then insert at the root of the tongue, and its function is to elevate the root of the tongue and depress the soft palate, and by doing so, it narrows the opening of the pharynx to assist the swallowing process. The last muscle is the palatopharyngeus muscle, which is this one. It originates from the palatine aponeurosis, but it inserts at the lateral wall of the pharynx. So its function is to elevate the pharynx and depress the soft palate, which also assists with narrowing the opening of the pharynx to seal off the pharynx from the oral cavity completely. So these 5 are the big guys when it comes to the soft palate. They are the main muscles. But these 2 up here are special, the palatopharyngeal and the palatoglossus muscle. The reason why they're special is because the palatoglossal muscle is going to form an arch as it goes from the soft palate to the tongue, called the palatoglossal arch. And the palatopharyngeal muscle is going to form an arch as it goes from the soft palate to the pharynx, called the palatopharyngeal arch. And between these 2 arches, you will find the palatine tonsil, which help with the local immunity. And here, just to visualize them better, here's a side view of those arches, along with the palatine tonsil. Awesome. So that was all for the anatomy of the heart and soft palate. Now let's talk about the inferior border. The inferior border of the oral cavity proper consists of 2 things. First is what we call the floor of the oral cavity, which consists of 3 main muscles that primarily go from the inner surface of the mandible all the way to the hyoid bone. These muscles are the mylohyoid muscle anterior belly of the digastric muscle, and the genohyoid muscle. And just to orientate, you will normally find the submandibular gland below them and the sublingual gland above them. So if you lift your tongue up like this, you will find the floor of the oral cavity here. The other important structure when we talk about the inferior border is the tongue. So let's talk about that. One thing I want you to remember about the tongue is that it's not a muscle, it's a muscle organ, meaning it's comprised of several muscles. The other thing that I want you to know about the tongue is that it's composed of three main parts. It's made up of the apex, which is the tip of the tongue, a body, and a root. Now let's look at the tongue from this perspective and go through all the structures associated with the tongue. Now, just to orientate, here you see the palatopharyngeal arch containing the palatoglossus muscle, and here you see the palatopharyngeal arch containing the palatopharyngeal muscle. And between them, there's a palatine tonsil, and back here is the epiglottis. So again, the tongue consists of three parts. First, we have the root of the tongue, then there's the body of the tongue, and then there's the apex of the tongue. Now the tongue has some important landmarks. First, there's a sulcus here in the middle called the median sulcus of the tongue. Then more posteriorly, you will find another groove called the terminal sulcus, which is a V-shaped groove that separates the body of the tongue from the root of the tongue. At the tip of the terminal sulcus, you will find the foramen cecum of the tongue, which is a small depression here in this region. The foramen cecum is a remnant of the thyroglossal duct, which was a canal formed by the descent of the thyroid during development in fetal life. Behind the terminal sulcus is the lingual tonsil, which lies at the root of the tongue. The lingual tonsil is a diffuse lymphoid tissue located in the submucosal connective tissue that forms bumps on the surface of the root of the tongue. And behind the lingual tonsil, there's the right and the left glossoepiglottic fold, or sometimes also referred to as the lateral glossoepiglottic folds. And what this is that there are two mucosal folds that connect the tongue to the epiglottis to hold the epiglottis in place. And in the middle, there's a median epiglottic fold. Between these folds, there are the epiglottic vallicula, which are depressions between the lateral and the medial glossoepiglottic folds. Other things you will find is that if you lift up your tongue, you will find the frenulum of the tongue, which connects the tongue to the floor of the oral cavity. On either side of the frenulum, you will find a pair of fimbriated folds as well, and on the lower border of the tongue, there's a sublingual fold, which has many small openings for the small sublingual ducts coming from the sublingual glands. And then there's the sublingual caruncle. These are two tubercles, as you see here on either side of the frenulum, where the submandibular and the major sublingual gland open into. Awesome. Now let's go through the muscles of the tongue. Now, the muscles of the tongue are divided into the extrinsic muscles and the intrinsic muscles. Extrinsic muscles, or the extraglossal muscles, originate from bones and insert at the tongue. The intraglossal muscles, or intrinsic muscles, they originate and insert within the tongue. Functionally, the extrinsic muscles focus on movement of the tongue, and the intrinsic muscles focusing on changing the shape of the tongue. So let's look at these muscles. The first muscle is called genioglossus muscle, which is this one. It originates from the upper mental spine of the mandible and inserts at the root of the tongue. And its function is to pull the tongue forward and depress the tongue. Then there's the styloglossus muscle. This muscle originates from the styloid process. So imagine for a second that the styloid process is here. So it goes from the styloid process and then insert at the root of the tongue. And its function is to pull the tongue backwards as well as elevating the tongue. Then we have the hyoglossus muscle, this one. This muscle originates from the hyoid bone and then it inserts at the root of the tongue. And the function is to pull the tongue backwards as well as depressing the tongue. The last muscle depends on the source you're studying from. Some sources say there are only 3 extrinsic muscles of the tongue, so they don't count the palatoglossal muscle as a part of the extrinsic muscles. But some sources count the palatoglossal as a part of the extrinsic muscles. But we will add this one in our list because it's also going to aid in the movement of the tongue. Remember, this muscle is the muscle that originates from the palatine aponeurosis of the soft palate and goes down and inserts at the root of the tongue. And its function is to narrow the opening of the oropharynx by elevating the root of the tongue and depress the soft palate. So these are the 4 extrinsic muscles of the tongue. Within the tongue itself, you will find the intrinsic muscles. These are the superior and the inferior longitudinal muscles, which run from the apex of the tongue to the root of the tongue. So its function is to shorten the tongue. Then we have the vertical muscles of the tongue, which connect the upper surface to the lower surface, and its function is to flatten the tongue. Then we have the transverse muscles of the tongue, which arise from the median fibrous septum, and they run to the lateral sides of the tongue. And when they contract, they're going to narrow the tongue. And so that was all the muscles of the tongue. Now on the surface of the tongue, we're going to have something called lingual papillae, which contain taste buds to sense taste. And different parts of the tongue senses different taste because you're going to have different taste buds on several locations of the tongue. First, we have the filiform papilla. They give the tongue its roughness because it contains a thick layer of epithelial tissue on top of it. It looks quite rough when you look at it. Next, we have the fungiform papilla, which is a small elevation that carries taste receptor buds. Next, we have the valate papilla. The valate papilla is located near the terminal sulcus, and this also contains taste buds. Then we have the foliate papilla. The foliate papilla also contains taste buds, and it's located on the lateral regions of the tongue. So that was all the inferior borders. Posteriorly to the oral cavity proper is the oropharynx, and between the pharynx and the oral cavity there's a narrowing called the isthmus of Fouts, or sometimes referred to as the oropharyngeal isthmus, which is the bordering line between the oral cavity proper and the pharynx. And that, my friends, is the oral cavity proper. If you found this video helpful, please put a like, share.
The human eye. The human eye is the most valuable and sensitive sense organ, and it is a natural optical instrument. The eye is nearly spherical in shape with a slight bulge in the front part, and it enables us to see the beautiful, colorful world around us. Let us discuss about the important parts of the eye and their functions. Cornea. The front part of the eye is covered by transparent spherical membrane called cornea. Light enters the eye through cornea. Iris. Just behind the cornea is a dark-colored muscular diaphragm which has a small circular opening in the middle. Pupil. Pupil is a small circular opening of iris. The pupil appears black because no light is reflected from it. The dark center in the middle of the iris. The pupil determines how much light is let into the eye. It changes sizes to accommodate for the amount of light that is available. The iris regulates the light by adjusting the size of the pupil. Let us see how iris regulates and controls the amount of light entering the eye. When the intensity of light is more, or if it is a bright source of light, then the iris makes the pupil to contract, and as a result the amount of light entering the eye decreases. When the intensity of light is less, or if the light is dim, then the iris dilates the pupil so that more light can enter the eye. Eye lens. The eye lens is a convex lens made of a transparent jelly like proteinaceous material. The eye lens is hard at the middle and gradually becomes soft towards the outer edges. The eye lens is held in position by ciliary muscles. The ciliary muscles help in changing the curvature and focal length of the eye lens. Retina. The inner back surface of the eyeball is called retina. It is a semi-transparent membrane which is light sensitive and is equivalent to the screen of a camera. The light sensitive receptors of the retina are called rods and cones. When light falls on these receptors, they send electrical signals to the brain through the optic nerve. The space between the retina and eye lens is filled with another fluid called vitreous humor. Blind spot. It is the spot at which the optic nerve enters the eye and is insensitive to light, and hence the name. Let us discuss about accommodation of the eye and power of accommodation. Accommodation of the eye. The process by which the ciliary muscles change the focal length of an eye lens to focus distant or near objects clearly on the retina is called the accommodation of the eye. Power of accommodation. The ability of the eye to focus objects lying at different distances is called the power of accommodation of the eye. How does an eye focus objects at varying distances? When the ciliary muscles are relaxed, the eye lens becomes thin. Thus, its focal length increases and we see the distant objects clearly. When the ciliary muscles are contract, then the curvature of the eye lens increases and the eye lens becomes thick. Thus, its focal length decreases and we see the nearby objects. In brief, it is adjustment of the focal length of the eye lens which enables us to focus on objects situated at different distances. Least distance of distinct vision, near point. Near point or least distance of distinct vision is the point nearest to the eye at which an object is visible distinctly. For a normal eye, the least distance of distinct vision is about 25 centimeters. However, it varies with age of the person. For example, for infants, it is only 5 to 8 centimeter. The far point of the eye. Far point of the eye is the maximum distance up to which the normal eye can see things clearly. It is infinity for a normal eye. Cataract. The crystalline lens of people at old age becomes milky and cloudy. This condition is called cataract. This causes partial or complete loss of vision. It is possible to restore vision through a cataract surgery. Range of vision. The distance between the near point and the far point is called the range of vision. Black hole.